I sat there stiffly, the water glass trembling slightly in my hand as laughter erupted down the table. The restaurant lights glittered off wine glasses and diamond rings, but none of it reached me. She's not family. She's our maid. My nephew's voice rang sharp, casual, rehearsed. Around him, smiles didn't falter. Not once. After co-signing his first loan, after covering his wedding, after 23 years of holiday meals in my home, I was just the help. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Helen adjusted the sleeves of her pressed navy dress, the fabric crisp against her skin, her palms dry but clenched with intention. She'd spent 35 minutes choosing this outfit. Not flashy, not plain, just appropriate. The restaurant loomed ahead like a palace, glassy, glittering, loud with laughter from people who never had to think twice about splitting the bill. Through the tinted glass doors of velour, she could already see them. Tyler was halfway through a dramatic retelling of some sales call, gesturing with that same performative flair he used to get out of speeding tickets. Marissa sat beside him, flipping her hair, her ring catching light like it had been positioned for a magazine spread. Helen hesitated, then pushed through the door. The host spotted her and smiled professionally. "Welcome to Velour. Name on the—" "I'm with the Carson party," she said. He gestured her toward the table. Tyler saw her first. He didn't rise, just raised his eyebrows. "Well, look who made it." She took the last empty chair, closest to the corner, furthest from the light. Before she could unfold her napkin, Tyler had already grabbed the wine list. "Let's not cheap out tonight," he announced. "Get us the Chimus, the 21 if you have it." The waiter, a lanky man with tired eyes, nodded. "Of course. And for the lady," Tyler cut in, glancing at Helen like she was a misplaced bag. "Oh, she's not family. She's our maid. Just bring her the lunch menu." Silence landed like a slap. Helen didn't blink. Her fingers wrapped around the stem of her water glass as the waiter froze, eyes darting from Tyler to her and back. Marissa gave a low chuckle, not even turning her head. Maybe see if they have chicken tenders. That's more her speed. A burst of laughter from the other end of the table, their cousin Drew maybe, or one of Marissa's Botox sisters. It didn't matter. It all sounded like white noise underwater. Helen raised her glass and held it still for a beat too long. The rim touched her lips, but she didn't sip. Her throat had gone tight. The waiter gave a polite nod, as though he'd misheard the whole exchange. "Of course, I'll be right back with the menus." He walked off fast. The rest of the table didn't skip a beat. They pivoted to Q3 numbers and bonuses, to ski trips planned and how expensive Aspen had gotten. Helen sat there, bones locked in place, her heart no longer thudding but reconfiguring. The Camus arrived, deep red and poured smooth like silk. Tyler toasted to our unstoppable quarter, glasses clinked, and no one turned to include her. Helen looked at the glass in front of her, hers was water of course, and took a slow sip, tasting nothing. A vibration buzzed in her clutch. A text. She glanced. From Mom. "Be nice tonight, they're trying." Helen exhaled through her nose. She didn't text back. Instead, she looked around the table, one face at a time. Tyler's booming laugh, Marissa's smug glance down at her salad. The rest of them, people she used to build forts with, cry to, share birthdays with. She felt her stomach go hollow. Not from hunger, from clarity. This wasn't accidental cruelty. This was theater, deliberate, rehearsed, public. And tonight, they thought they'd shoved her off the stage. Let them believe it. The corner of Helen's mouth lifted. Barely. She reached for her glass again, still water, and raised it quietly, to no one in particular. Then she whispered to herself, "Let's begin." A scene that quietly roars with Helen's internal shift from wounded to calculating. It builds momentum, deepens her backstory with Tyler, and escalates the stakes with a chilling legal move. Here's your full Section 2, crafted with cinematic immersion, zero repetition. and an emotional hook at the end. The door clicked shut behind her with a soft finality. Helen didn't bother turning on the lights. The ambient glow from the street lamp outside spilled through the blinds, striping the hardwood in cold silver. She kicked off her heels in the foyer, one after the other, then stood motionless for a moment, breathing in the silence of her house, clean, symmetrical, untouched. The earrings came off next, one, then the other. She didn't wear them often, small diamond studs, a gift from her father the week she graduated NYU. Tonight they'd felt like armor. Now they clinked softly into a porcelain dish on the entry table like spent shells. She crossed the living room, fingers brushing the edge of the couch as she passed it. The photos on the wall, vacations, anniversaries, baby showers she'd hosted for other people, watched her like silent witnesses. In the study, she opened the antique roll-top desk and pulled out a slim black folder. The label was typed and laminated, centered with obsessive neatness. Support. Tyler, 2001-2022. She laid it flat on the glass desk and flipped it open. Inside, a stack of photocopied checks organized by year. Paper-clipped, logged, annotated in her precise handwriting. The first one, dated July 10, 2001, was for $200. Memo line, security deposit, Tyler's first apartment. Next, a co-signed document for a student loan. Then, a $3,500 check for a used Honda Civic he promptly wrecked and never replaced. A signed statement from her old bank manager, showing she took out a personal line of credit when his startup nearly drowned in its second year. Page after page, thousands of dollars. A decade's worth of lifelines, each piece a receipt of devotion that had quietly rotted into leverage. Helen's hand didn't shake. She turned each page like she was reading blueprints to a building she'd once dreamed of living in, before she knew it was built on sand. She paused at the check from 2015, $8,000, down payment for Tyler and Marissa's wedding venue. She had ironed that dress herself, paid for the centerpieces, watched them exchange vows beneath a chandelier she'd written the deposit for. Helen reached for a pen. She added a fresh note on a sticky tab and pressed it to the margin beside the most recent check. Demeaned me in public. October 2nd, 2025. Then she closed the folder, snapped the clasp shut, filed it away in the locked cabinet like an exhibit in a trial that hadn't started yet, but would. She stared at the cabinet door for a moment, then stood, crossed the room, picked up the landline, not a cell, not this time, and dialed by memory. It rang once, twice, then a voice, warm and a little breathless. Eugene Kramer speaking. Hi, Eugene, it's Helen. A pause. Helen, is everything all right? She looked out the window. A breeze rattled the dry leaves across the porch like they were trying to escape something. I need you to update the will, she said calmly. Remove Tyler completely. I don't care about the optics. Cut him out of everything, effective immediately. Eugene exhaled. Are you sure? That'll trigger? I'm sure. A longer pause this time. Then, understood. I'll start the paperwork tonight. She didn't say thank you, not because she wasn't grateful, because this wasn't gratitude. It was war. Helen hung up. Her reflection looked back at her in the window, eyes sharp, lips flat, face no longer soft at the edges. Not sad, not shaken, prepared. She turned away and reached into the drawer beneath the desk, pulled out a small recorder. Hit play. Tyler's voice, captured during a call months ago, filled the room with oily bravado. Come on, Helen. You know the only reason I got the first bonus was because you fudged the pitch deck. Don't pretend that wasn't your rewrite. Her own voice, soft and clipped. You asked me to keep it between us. Yeah, and you did. Because you always do. She pressed stop. A fresh folder waited beside the first. This one read, Insurance, Audio Legal. She slid the recorder inside. Then slowly, deliberately, she shut the drawer. The doorbell rang just after 7, one long chime, then silence. Helen padded barefoot across the foyer. She'd changed into a soft sweatshirt and leggings, hair pulled back, face bare. When she opened the door, the autumn air spilled in, crisp and dry, carrying the scent of wood smoke from somewhere down the street. Lena stood on the porch, her arms wrapped awkwardly around a cloth-covered basket. "I brought carbs," she grinned. "Because some people still believe in kindness." Helen's mouth twitched upward. "Do I look like someone who deserves kindness?" Lena stepped inside without waiting. "You look like someone who hasn't eaten." She walked straight into the kitchen, kicking off her boots by the door like she'd done it 100 times. She had that same backpack slung over one shoulder, patched, frayed at the zipper, stuffed with textbooks and notebooks too heavy for its seams. Helen followed, the warmth of the house returning behind them as she shut the door. Lena pulled the cloth back to reveal 3 small loaves of sourdough, golden, still warm, their edges cracked just slightly from the oven. "I overproofed the first batch," she said, setting the basket down. "These are take 2. Helen reached for one, broke off a piece. The crust crackled beneath her fingers, steam curled up like breath. "You didn't have to." "No, but I wanted to." Lena poured them both water from the tap, the old glass pitcher fogging as she set it on the table. "You've been on my mind." Helen sat, tearing another bite from the loaf. She hadn't realized how empty her stomach had been until the first bite hit. Salted, soft, rich, with butter. "So," she said between chews, "how's school?" Lena rolled her eyes and dropped into the chair across from her. "Hellish. My clinical supervisor thinks compassion fatigue is a made-up excuse for laziness. I'm averaging 3 hours of sleep, and I spent half of yesterday wiping vomit off my scrubs." Helen smiled softly. "Living the dream." "No, chasing it," Lena corrected, then shrugged. "But yeah, maybe." There was something easy in the air. No defense, no eggshells. Just 2 people at a kitchen table, the clock ticking faintly in the background. After a pause, Helen said, "You make me feel remembered." Lena blinked. Her face shifted, softening into something that almost looked like awe. She whispered, "You made me feel worth remembering." Silence, but not a heavy one. Just stillness. Like neither of them wanted to ruin the moment with noise. Helen stood, walked to the desk in the corner. She pulled out a slim, cream-colored folder and brought it to the table. She placed it gently in front of Lena. "I have something to ask you," Lena glanced down, confused. "What is it?" "Would you?" Helen said, her voice steady but low. "Do me the honor of being my heir." Lena's lips parted. She looked from Helen to the folder, then back. "I what?" "No, I can't, Helen, that's—" "You can," Helen said firmly. "And you will." Lena pushed the folder slightly away. "You have nieces, nephews. You have—" "None of whom would wipe vomit off their shoes for someone else, let alone their scrubs." Helen tilted her head. "You didn't show up tonight for money. You showed up because you cared." Lena was quiet. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, like she wouldn't let herself cry yet. "What's in it?" she asked finally, touching the folder's edge. "Preliminary paperwork," Helen said. "Eugene's already drawing up the final draft. This is just the transfer of beneficiary rights. I wanted you to see it before it became real." Lena's fingers hovered above the clasp. She looked up, voice barely a whisper. "Are you sure about this?" Helen reached across the table, covered Lena's hand with her own. "I've never been more sure of anything." Lena opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the first page, her name typed in bold. Legal language below it. Then the second page, the dollar amount, the properties, the trust. Her breath caught in her throat. Then the last page, something handwritten in blue ink, tucked like a letter. She looked up, eyes wide. "Helen." Helen leaned back in her chair, watching her reaction. "There's more, but that part you read alone." Lena held the letter with both hands, her fingers trembling. Outside, the wind picked up. The leaves whispered against the windows like they wanted to come in. Inside, Lena whispered one word. Why? Helen stood, her expression unreadable. I'm done feeding wolves. Deepens the revenge arc by solidifying Helen's strategic decisions through legal action. Emotionally, it stays grounded. This is not just about removing people from her life, but redefining who deserves access to her name, body, and legacy. The tone must remain cool, deliberate, and emotionally intimate, especially between Helen and Lena, while steadily escalating the sense of irreversible change. Here is your fully written Section 4. The scanner hummed steadily under Eugene's hand, feeding documents one by one into the encrypted server. His office, tucked inside a beige legal suite downtown, smelled faintly of paper and lemon oil. Helen sat across from him in a tailored black coat, eyes locked on the monitor as line after line of transfer data updated in real time. Assets, trusts, business shares, everything, he said without looking at her. By end of week, the legal reassignments will be complete. Helen nodded once. And the list? He clicked open a folder titled Estate Restrictions. Her voice had been clear on the phone, clinical even. She leaned forward now as Eugene scrolled to a page labeled Beneficiary Category, No Contact, Irrevocable. Under it, Tyler James Carson, Marissa Lane. Carson, language is airtight, Eugene said. They can't challenge any part of it without triggering discovery, which, considering the folder you gave me. They won't want discovery, Helen said flatly, not when they realize how much of what they took was traceable. He paused, watching her over the rim of his glasses. You're aware what this will provoke. She met his gaze. I'm counting on it. The next morning, movers arrived just after 9. Helen directed them without sentiment, room by room, item by item. Family antiques, inherited silver, 2 oil paintings her mother swore would be hers one day. Everything went into climate-controlled storage under a business name Lena didn't know yet belonged to her. Helen watched the truck pull away, hands in the pockets of her wool coat. Leaves skittered past her boots as the wind kicked up again. That afternoon, she met with her notary and quietly rewrote 2 documents, power of attorney medical directives. Both now bore Lena's name in clean blue ink. No more Tyler, no more loopholes. Later that week, Lena stepped into Eugene's office. Hair still damp from the rain, her hands tucked into her sleeves. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just scrubs under a thrifted peacoat, and the weight of something she wasn't sure how to name. Eugene stood to greet her. You're exactly on time, he said warmly, gesturing to the seat across from him. Lena sat, knees together, eyes scanning the polished wood desk. He opened the folder slowly, as though walking her into deep water. I imagine this is a lot. But Helen insisted you see everything for yourself. She wanted transparency. Lena nodded. Eugene pulled out the first document. This is the updated trust. You're now listed as sole beneficiary across all 3, personal, real estate, and liquid. The second. This is your designation as power of attorney. Effective immediately, it gives you full legal and medical authority should Helen become incapacitated. The third. Healthcare proxy. Same as above. And this? He tapped the final page. This is your signature line. Once you sign, it's active. Lena stared at the pen. Her fingers hovered above it, then drew back. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Eugene didn't push. She believes you are. I'm not family. She knows. Lena swallowed hard. Her hands trembled. But she reached forward, picked up the pen, and signed each page with steady strokes. Her signature, small, tight, and resolute, claimed each line like it was a vow. She pushed the folder back toward him. Done. Eugene closed it with care. As Lena stood, she turned toward the window. Rain tapped gently against the glass, blurring the skyline. She didn't do this just to protect herself, did she? No, Eugene said softly. She did it to protect what matters, and that's you now. Across town, Helen lit a fire in the living room. The kindling caught fast, flames licking the logs as warmth filled the space again. She sat on the floor, knees drawn up, sipping tea in silence. She pulled out a worn photo, Tyler, 10 years old, missing a front tooth. He was laughing, reaching for her hand. She studied it for a long time. Then calmly, she slipped it into the fire. The flames curled around the edges. She didn't blink. The knock came just after dusk. 2 soft raps, deliberate but rehearsed. Helen didn't answer right away. She let the moment breathe. Outside, the porch light buzzed faintly, catching the silhouette through frosted glass. Heels, expensive coat, hair just undone enough to look accidental. When she finally opened the door, Marissa stood there with her practiced smile. "I was just in the neighborhood," she said, though Helen knew she lived a full 45 minutes away. Helen stepped aside. "Of course you were." Marissa walked in like she'd been invited. Her perfume trailed behind her, subtle but calculated. She looked around the foyer at the framed photos still missing from the walls, the space that felt slightly barer than last time she was here. "You've redecorated," she said lightly. Helen didn't reply. They moved to the kitchen. Helen didn't ask if she wanted tea. She just put the kettle on, slow and precise. Marissa sat at the island, crossing her legs at the ankle like it was a magazine shoot. "I just wanted to clear the air," Marissa said, placing her phone face down on the marble. "About the other night." Helen poured boiling water into 2 porcelain cups, white, rimmed with gold. The kind Marissa had once said was too delicate to actually use. She stirred honey into hers, left the second untouched. Marissa cleared her throat. Tyler meant nothing by it. He was trying to be funny. You know how he gets when he's had wine. Helen's hands didn't pause. "You laughed." A small silence. Marissa smiled, a touch too wide. "It wasn't about you. It was about the performance, the show. You know how family dinners can be. Everyone trying to one-up each other." Helen turned, meeting her gaze fully now. "You didn't say anything to stop him." The smile faltered. "Well, I didn't agree with it, obviously. But you know how it is. Timing. It would have made things worse in front of everyone." Helen placed the teacup in front of her with care. "You know what I realized that night?" she asked, voice calm. "I wasn't in the family anymore. I was just a reminder." Marissa's brows drew in. "A reminder of what?" "What generosity used to look like." The words hung in the space between them like steam rising from the cup. Marissa let out a soft, breathy laugh. "You're being dramatic. You know you'll always be taken care of. Your blood. Tyler and I, well, we've always said that when the time comes." "I won't need your care," Helen said, tone even. "Or your permission." That froze Marissa mid-sentence. She blinked, sat straighter. "Helen, come on. You've had a rough week, but we're not enemies." "No," Helen said, smiling faintly. "Enemies require equal footing." Marissa picked up the teacup with careful fingers. Her ring flashed under the overhead light. She sipped once, then set it down without drinking again. "This isn't like you," she said, quieter now. "You've always been the peacemaker, the fixer." Helen tilted her head. "Maybe I'm fixing things now." A long silence settled between them. In the background, the old mantel clock ticked. Steady, loud. Marissa stood, adjusting her coat with deliberate grace. "Well, I'm glad we talked." Helen followed her to the door, opened it without rush. Marissa stepped onto the porch, paused, then turned with that smile, smaller now, more reserved. "You know," she said lightly, "people might get the wrong idea about all this distancing." Helen didn't move. "Only if they think I care about appearances." Marissa held her gaze a beat too long, then nodded once. "Well, take care of yourself." Helen's reply was soft. "I am." Marissa walked to her car with practiced poise, heels clicking against the slate path. She didn't look back. But once she was inside, windows up, engine idling, her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than she meant to. The smile she'd worn for the past 40 minutes collapsed. She stared at the house, something uneasy curling low in her gut. Something was happening, and for the first time in her carefully curated life, Marissa had no control over it. The office door slammed open hard enough to rattle the frame degrees. Tyler stormed in, jaw tight, suit wrinkled at the sleeves like he hadn't slept. Marissa followed close behind, her heels snapping sharp against the marble floor, face flush with heat. She looked polished, always, but brittle in a way Eugene hadn't seen before. Eugene didn't stand. He simply looked up from his desk, glasses low on his nose, pen paused mid-signature. "Well," he said, "right on time." Tyler dropped a manila envelope onto the desk. It burst slightly at the sides. Copies of the trust reassignment, property transfers, and the newly recorded healthcare proxy sliding out like they'd tried to escape. "What the hell is this?" Tyler hissed. Eugene adjusted his glasses. "That would be your formal severance from Helen's estate." Tyler's mouth opened, closed. "She can't do this." "She already did." Marissa stepped forward, voice more composed. "You're misinterpreting her intentions. This is just a warning shot. Helen's emotional, but she cools off." Eugene didn't blink. She described the changes as permanent. Tyler's fists clenched at his sides. "And you just went along with it?" "I'm her attorney," Eugene said simply. "I carry out her instructions." This was her exact phrasing. "Make the paperwork bulletproof. I want emotional closure, financial separation, and no possibility of exploitation." Marissa scoffed. "This is some stunt. It's to scare us." "She's bluffing." Eugene leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "If you think Helen bluffs, then you never really knew her." Tyler pointed at the paperwork. "She owes me. We built that portfolio together. I gave her years, loyalty, support." Eugene raised an eyebrow. "Support, is it?" Marissa's smile was tight. "This isn't about business. It's personal. And if she's making it personal, that opens the door to civil damages. We have options." Eugene opened a drawer, pulled out a sleek black flash drive, placed it gently in the center of the table. "No, you have evidence." Tyler didn't move. Marissa reached for it, but paused. "What is this?" "Let's call it insurance," Eugene said. "Audio files, statements, records of financial contributions dating back 2 decades. Tyler's face changed. Subtly, but enough. His shoulders dropped half an inch. His jaw twitched. "She's been recording me?" he asked. "No," Eugene replied. "She's been documenting. That's what you do when people start to forget where they came from." Marissa looked down at the drive like it might burn her fingers. "Is this meant to threaten us?" "No," Eugene said again, voice calm. "It's meant to save you time." Tyler leaned on the desk now, closer, lower, voice gravel thick. "You think this ends here? You think this gets to stick? She was nothing without me. She was invisible." Eugene's tone didn't change. "You should sit with that sentence for a long time." Silence dropped like a hammer. Marissa stepped back first. Her face had paled. Tyler stood upright again, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. "Fine. She wants war? She can have it." "Not war," Eugene said, standing at last. "Boundaries." Tyler and Marissa exchanged a look, one that said this wasn't going the way they'd rehearsed. Marissa's voice broke the quiet. "She'll change her mind. She always does." "Not unless you change your nature," Eugene said. "And I wouldn't bet on either." Marissa reached out, grabbed the flash drive. Tyler hesitated, then followed her to the door. As they reached it, Eugene spoke once more. "She asked me to give you something else." They both turned. He opened another folder, white, minimal, clipped neatly together. Marissa's name was on the cover. She stepped forward slowly, took it. "What is it?" Tyler asked. Marissa opened the folder, her breath caught. At the top of the page, restraining order, draft notice. Helen's handwriting in blue ink across the bottom margin. "This is the kind version. You won't like the next one." The room was quiet except for the low whir of the playback system. Eugene's office blinds were drawn, the lights dimmed. A laptop sat open on the conference table. Its screen paused on a frozen frame. Tyler, wineglass in hand, half laughing. Marissa beside him, mid-eye roll, her mouth open mid-comment. Darlene's dining room in the background. Thanksgiving, maybe. Or Easter. It didn't matter. Helen stood near the window, arms folded. Her face unreadable. Eugene clicked play. Tyler's voice echoed through the speakers. Careless, cocky. Let's be real, she's just a walking checkbook with pearls. A burst of laughter followed. Marissa's. Oh, come on, she giggled. Be nice. Wait till she's gone. Then we flip the place and finally get something livable. Another voice, someone unnamed, chimed in. Don't forget the antiques. That silver set alone could fund your next Cabo trip. More laughter. Helen didn't blink. She just listened. There were timestamps on the corner of the screen. 3 years ago, 2 years, 9 months. All different dinners, different clothes. Same contempt. Same voices, same entitlement. Eugene pressed pause. Darlene had the habit of recording family events. For posterity, she said. She kept a library on external drives. Gave Helen copies 2 Christmases ago without realizing what she'd captured. Helen finally spoke. She said it was in case anyone forgot where we came from. Eugene clicked through several more files, one after another, dinner after dinner. The pattern was unmistakable. Tyler, Helen's going soft. The house, the money. She doesn't even know she's sitting on a gold mine. Marissa. We just need to be patient. One good stroke of bad luck and the whole estate slides our way. Tyler. Give it another year, maybe 2. People like her fade quietly. Helen stepped forward, voice calm but laced with iron. Include them all in the permanent file. Every clip. Eugene hesitated only a second. Understood. She handed him a second drive. These 2, they're from the lake house, Darlene's backups. Eugene took it gently. Do you want them disclosed now or only if litigation begins? Helen looked at the screen again, at her brother's smirk, frozen in time. Let them hear themselves, she said. Let them sit in it. Later that night, Helen sat in her study, soft jazz playing on the old stereo. Lena curled on the couch nearby, thumbing through a nursing textbook, her mouth twisting at some impossibly dry footnote. Helen reached for the thin file marked Recordings, cataloged, and placed it into the lower cabinet. Lena looked up. Did it go how you wanted? Helen thought for a moment. It went how it had to. Lena closed the book on her lap. They're going to come harder now. I know. You're not scared? Helen sipped her tea. I was, but then I remembered something important. What's that? She turned to look at her. Silence never protected anyone. Lena watched her for a long beat. You think they'll back off? No, Helen said. I think they'll escalate. Because people like them don't believe in consequences. Not until they're holding the receipt. Outside, the wind curled past the windows, a low hum under the music. Lena rose and crossed to the cabinet. Opened it. Inside, folder after folder. Dates, evidence, affidavits, photocopies. And now, recordings. She closed the drawer. This isn't a file cabinet, she murmured. Helen raised an eyebrow. No, it's a reckoning. Tyler adjusted his cufflinks with trembling fingers. The conference room at Stride Bank's downtown tower was cold and sterile, windows looking out over the skyline like a judgment. 3 board members sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, expressions unreadable. One of them clicked a pen. Another scrolled slowly on an iPad. Tyler cleared his throat. This is all deeply taken out of context. The HR director didn't look up. The recording we received covers more than 6 minutes of unprovoked commentary, including language the ethics clause specifically prohibits. She's my sister, Tyler said. It was a joke. It wasn't funny, said one board member, and it wasn't private. The video, sent anonymously but traced to a legal Dropbox, had arrived 3 days ago. Boardroom banter, golf course talk, audio from dinners he didn't even remember being recorded. Tyler Carson, VP of Wealth Growth and Client Trust. Now under formal disciplinary review, unbecoming conduct. He stared out the window and watched the glass reflection of his own jaw clench. Marissa's brand deal with Alta West collapsed at 9:14 a.m. She'd just finished her first cappuccino when her agent called. Voice low, clipped. "They pulled the contract," he said. "You're trending." She opened her phone. Screenshots, group chat archives, years of smug commentary, all leaked. Her own words, laughing about Helen's deadweight elegance and how she planned to rip the house from under her when the time comes. A private thread from a family WhatsApp group she hadn't even remembered being in. Her name, her face, reposted, reshared. Cashed out. Checkbook with pearls. Modern Cruella. She dropped her phone. It clattered against the marble floor. Back at the house, Helen stood in her backyard garden. She wore a light cardigan, sleeves rolled up, knees pressed into the soft mulch as she worked among the basil and sage. A faint mist hung in the morning air. A robin watched her from the fence post. She never checked the news. She didn't need to. The lavender had finally bloomed. Darlene walked up the garden path slowly, carrying a mason jar of lemonade and a raised eyebrow. "Well," she said, setting the jar down on the stone ledge. "I've seen a lot of things in this town, but I've never seen someone fall so quietly." Helen snipped the head off a yellowing stalk. Gravity doesn't need an audience. Darlene sat on the garden bench. "They're unraveling. Emails, voicemails, statements from old coworkers. People are coming forward. You didn't bury them." Helen looked up, meeting her eyes. "No." "They walked into the grave," Darlene said. Helen nodded once, willingly. Inside, Lena scrolled through her phone, a slow swirl of headlines and hashtags flooding her screen. She heard the back door open and close, footsteps, the faint rustle of Helen removing her gloves. Lena met her in the kitchen. "They're done," she said softly. Helen removed her boots, set them by the door, washed her hands at the sink, methodical and clean. "You're so calm," Lena whispered. Helen dried her hands, folded the towel, hung it neatly on the oven bar. "I let the truth speak louder than my voice ever could." Lena crossed the room, stopped beside her. "They'll come to you, to fix it, to patch the story." "I know," Helen said. "And?" Helen picked up a teacup from the drying rack, inspected it for spots. "And they'll find I'm not there." Lena leaned against the counter, watching her. "What now?" Helen looked out the window, toward the horizon where the storm clouds were thinning. "Now we see who they are," she said. "When the curtain's gone." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the bailiff called the session to order. Helen sat near the front, flanked by Eugene and Lena, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a charcoal gray blazer, simple pearl studs, no makeup except for a thin line of eyeliner, just enough to keep her expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Tyler adjusted his tie for the 5th time. Marissa, tense beside him, whispered something through tight lips, but he didn't respond. Their attorney, a young man with a practiced smile and overconfidence he hadn't earned, leaned forward. "They'll say this was emotional," he whispered to Tyler. "Stay cold. She has nothing without motive." Behind them, the gallery filled quickly. Neighbors, distant cousins, ex-colleagues. A few reporters had shown up too. Someone whispered, "Did you hear what he called her?" "I saw the video." "They used her like a ladder." The judge entered, firm-voiced, mid-60s, robe crisp. "Case number 43579, Carson v. for Carson. Contestation of estate transfer and allegation of undue influence." Eugene stood first. "Your Honor, my client, Helen Carson, executed a full reassignment of trust, medical directive, and power of attorney with independent legal counsel, sound mental capacity, and zero financial duress. We submit into record notarized documents, recorded statements, and over 40 items of correspondence dating back more than a decade." He handed the clerk a thick binder and a flash drive. Also included audio files, photographic evidence, and detailed ledgers of Ms. Carson's financial support. Over $300,000 in documented transfers to the opposing party. The judge nodded. Noted. Let's proceed. Tyler's lawyer rose. Your Honor, we contend this action was not made freely, but under emotional coercion. Our client believes Ms. Carson was manipulated during a period of mental distress, leading to an irrational estate restructuring that contradicts a lifetime of familial intention. The judge glanced down at her notes. The same distress Ms. Carson experienced while funding your client's education, his wedding, and multiple business ventures, the lawyer faltered. Those were gifts. They were documented, Eugene cut in, down to the memo lines. A murmur moved through the gallery. Marissa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Tyler's jaw tensed. The judge looked toward Helen. Would you like to speak, Miss Carson? Helen rose calmly, walked to the front with measured steps. She didn't look at Tyler, not once. My family believed love was owed, she began. But what they offered in return wasn't love. It was leverage. She paused. I gave them years, money, shelter, trust. What I asked for wasn't repayment. I asked for respect. And when that stopped showing up at the table, I stopped setting places. Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it softened. Love is not currency. Respect is. Then she turned and returned to her seat. Tyler opened his mouth, half rising, but his lawyer gripped his arm. Hard. The judge didn't hesitate. Based on the evidence, the court finds no merit to the claim of undue influence. The estate transfer stands. Further, due to the baseless nature of this litigation and the reputational harm caused, Mr. and Mrs. Carson are hereby ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the defendant. A shocked silence. Then the gavel came down. One sharp crack. Court is adjourned. Outside, cameras flashed. Tyler walked fast, jaw set, Marissa shielding her face with her sunglasses. Reporters shouted questions, but they didn't answer. The SUV door slammed. Tires screeched. Gone. Inside, Helen stepped into the hallway just as Lena caught up. You okay? Helen nodded. I was never unsure. Eugene joined them, holding the file. It's done. Helen glanced back toward the courtroom doors. Not for them, she said. Not yet. Lena narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Helen looked down the corridor. Marble floors, polished walls, portraits of old judges watching over it all. They still think this was about money, Lena tilted her head. And it wasn't. Helen turned to her, eyes calm. Certain. No. It was about remembering what I'm worth. The ballroom shimmered in gold and deep navy. Crystal chandeliers arched overhead, throwing soft halos onto every tablecloth and glass. The Delacroix Foundation's annual gala pulsed with elegance. Laughter, polite applause, the clink of polished silver. Guests moved through the space in sequined gowns and sharp tuxedos, champagne flutes in hand, as string music hummed from a quartet near the dais. Helen stood at the edge of it all, Lena beside her. Lena wore a soft emerald green dress, her curls pinned back, eyes wide as she took everything in. She looked out of place in the most beautiful way, like someone who'd been told her whole life she didn't belong and had finally walked in anyway. I keep thinking someone's going to ask for my ticket again, she whispered. Helen's smile was small but steady. Let them. They were ushered toward the head table, a delicate brass plaque reading, Reserved, Carson Delacroix Fund. Several heads turned as they passed. At the table, Eugene stood and kissed Helen's cheek before offering Lena his seat. You made it, he said warmly. Helen replied simply, We don't miss things that matter anymore. The host stepped to the podium. The room quieted. A spotlight illuminated the front of the stage, where a velvet-draped easel stood. And now, the host said, voice strong but reverent, we unveil a new initiative, one born not of legacy wealth, but of legacy impact. He gestured. A staffer pulled the drape away to reveal a bronze-frame plaque. the Delacroix Legacy Fund for First-Generation Nurses established by Helen Carson, in honor of care not inherited but chosen. Lena blinked. Her lips parted, and for a second, she didn't breathe. Then it hit, like a wave too big to prepare for. She pressed her napkin to her mouth, shaking her head slightly, eyes already wet. Helen said nothing. She just placed a steady hand on Lena's knee beneath the table. Applause rang out, but Helen didn't look to the crowd. She looked forward. Later, as dessert was served, molten chocolate tortes, white porcelain plates, Eugene leaned across the table and handed Helen a slim black folder. "Finalized this morning," he said, with the satisfied tone of someone who'd built a cathedral brick by brick. Helen opened it. Inside, the final copy of the trust, stamped, signed, sealed, irrevocable. Eugene nodded toward it. "It's done. No more loopholes, no more appeals, not even a whisper of ambiguity." Helen touched the page, not possessively, but reverently. "I've never felt so unburdened," she said softly. Lana looked at her. "Do you regret any of it?" Helen met her eyes. "I regret waiting." The lights dimmed again for the next speaker, and Lena leaned her head briefly on Helen's shoulder. For the first time in years, Helen didn't tense under touch. At 10:47 p.m., as valet lines formed and champagne flutes emptied, Helen's phone vibrated once in her clutch. A message. "Tyler, you made your point." Helen stared at it for a moment. Not angry, not shaken, just amused. She showed Lena the screen. Lena scoffed. "That's it? That's what he thinks this was?" Helen deleted the text without responding. "No," she said. "That's what he hopes this was." She placed the phone back into her clutch, clicked it shut. Outside, the city lights flickered like old stars trying to stay relevant. Inside, Helen turned back to her table, her name carved into a cause no one could undo. The petition was filed on a Wednesday morning. Carson versus Carson, countersuit for malicious prosecution. Eugene delivered it to the courthouse in person, his steps slow, deliberate, the folder in his hand crisp and unmistakably thick. By Thursday evening, a local news anchor on Channel 7 was already calling it the inheritance war that won't die quietly. By Friday, a feature in the Pine Valley Gazette ran with a bolder headline, "Heirs from Hell." They used a stock photo of Tyler and Marissa from a charity golf event 2 summers ago, both smiling, sunglasses on, arms around each other. Underneath, the subheading read, "Sister turns the tables, and the trust." Helen didn't comment. She didn't return calls, issue statements, or correct the record. Instead, she baked. 2 loaves of banana bread, 1 lemon ricotta. Lena said the kitchen smelled like absolution. Helen just shrugged and kept slicing. Eugene handed her a folder over coffee the following Monday. "Marissa's team reached out," he said. "They want to drop the original complaint." Helen took a sip, unbothered. "Of course they do." "She doesn't want discovery," Eugene added. "Not after seeing what we're willing to put in front of a jury." Helen didn't smile, but there was a sharp glint in her eyes. "Let them drop it. Quietly." "She'll frame it as moving on," he warned. "She always does," Helen replied. Across the kitchen island, Darlene stirred honey into her tea and let out a low, impressed whistle. "You're a storm in heels," she muttered. No press conference, no yelling, just legal filings and soufflés. Helen arched a brow. "Noise gets you headlines. Silence gets you verdicts." The press kept spinning, of course. Clips of the original courtroom hearing aired on local evening news. One network ran a side-by-side feature, Helen in grayscale, Tyler and Marissa in color. The implication was clear. Someone had aged out of their power, and someone had fumbled theirs. Still, Helen gave no interviews. But she did sign 1 check. On Tuesday morning, Eugene arrived to find a letter on his desk. The entire sum of the legal fees, reimbursed by Tyler and Marissa under court order, had been donated. Recipient: the Elders Dignity Project Mission, Legal Defense, Housing Advocacy, and financial protection for aging Americans facing familial exploitation. The memo line simply read, "For the silenced." Eugene stared at the check for a long time, then folded the letter and filed it under Actions That Speak. That evening, Lena returned from her shift and found Helen in the garden again, pruning the hydrangeas. "Did you see the latest?" Lena asked, holding up her phone. "They're calling you the inheritance whisperer." Helen laughed, low and soft. "I'd prefer they didn't call me anything at all." "Well," Lena said, crouching down beside her, "they can't ignore you now." Helen clipped one stubborn blossom, letting it fall into the dirt. "Let them talk. I'm not here to be liked." "No," Lena said. "You're here to be heard." Helen looked at her. "I've already been heard." At 10:03 p.m., Helen received a single-line email from an unfamiliar address, from tyler.carson.personalugmail.com. Subject, Message. "We were never supposed to lose." Helen read it once, then hit archive. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark garden below, moonlight catching the wet leaves. Behind her, the house was silent. Not empty, just unburdened. The knock was softer than expected, not hesitant, just young. Helen opened the door to find a girl in a denim jacket and thrifted boots, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She wasn't made up, no gloss, no script, just nervous eyes and a messenger bag slung across one shoulder. Helen blinked. "Layla." Layla looked down at her shoes. "Hi." It had been 3 years since Helen had seen her. A graduation party. Back when Layla still wore cheer jackets and snapped selfies with an energy Helen both envied and feared for. Now she looked older, smaller somehow, like adulthood had come too fast, too sharp. Helen opened the door wider. "Come in." Layla stepped into the foyer slowly, like the floor might shift beneath her. "They don't know I'm here," she said, clutching the strap of her bag. "Mom and Dad." Helen nodded once. "I assumed." They walked into the sitting room. The fire was already lit, casting flickers against the picture frames and quiet bookshelves. Helen poured 2 cups of chamomile without asking and handed one to Layla, who took it with both hands like it might anchor her. They sat across from each other. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Layla said it, not loud but raw. "I'm sorry." Helen didn't flinch. "What for?" Layla exhaled. "For the way I've been raised." Helen's brows rose, but she said nothing. Layla looked down at the tea in her lap. "I used to think you were cold. That's how they talked about you. That you were dramatic, manipulative. That everything you gave came with a hook." "And now?" Helen asked. "I think they said that," Layla murmured, "because they didn't want to admit you gave more than they ever could." Silence. Then Helen set her cup down, careful and precise. "Are you here for forgiveness?" she asked. "Or a future?" Layla didn't answer right away. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. "Both." Helen studied her, the way her fingers curled around the teacup, the way her jaw didn't tremble, even though her words had. There was steel there, but also the shape of someone who hadn't yet been taught how to use it well. "You don't get both for free," Helen said. Layla nodded. "Okay." Helen leaned forward. "Then let me be direct. I'm listening." "There are conditions," Helen said. "Not for love, for access. You want to be in this house. You want to be in my life. You live by these." Layla sat up straighter. "First," Helen said, "you finish your degree. Not theirs, yours. You figure out what matters to you, and you follow it. Even if it's not shiny, even if it doesn't photograph well." "Okay." "Second," Helen continued, "you break clean. No financial ties, no back-and-forth visits, no getting their approval for being here. They'll lose it." "They already did," Helen said. Layla cracked a smile, just a flicker. "Fair." "And third," Helen's voice dropped, "you live with integrity, not performance. That means if someone offers you a shortcut, you ask who's paying for it." Layla nodded, but said nothing. Helen sat back. That's the deal, she said. I won't coddle you, but I won't leave you either. If you show up honest, I'll show up whole. Layla's eyes welled. Not a sob, not a scene, just quiet tears tracking down her cheeks like she hadn't realized they were waiting. Can I ask one thing, she whispered. Helen tilted her head. Why are you giving me this chance, Layla asked. After everything. Helen thought for a long moment, then said, Because I remembered what it was like to be the one they rewrote when I wasn't in the room. Layla covered her face with one hand. Helen rose, crossed to the fireplace, picked up an envelope that had been resting beneath a small sculpture of St. Lucia, her mother's. She held it out. Layla took it carefully. Inside was a check. Not large, but meaningful. Enough to fund the next semester, rent, books, and stapled to it, a typed contract, short and unflinching. No contact with Tyler or Marissa Carson for 1 year. All funds used for education-related expenses only. Quarterly check-ins with Helen Carson or Designy. Layla ran her fingers over the conditions. You already had this printed. I hoped, Helen said, then softer. I didn't expect. Layla looked up. I won't mess this up. I'm not asking for perfection, Helen said. I'm asking for truth. Layla nodded once. They sat there in silence again. Two women bridging something broken. The fire popped gently. Then, from the hallway, a faint knock. Lena appeared in the doorway, holding a tray of fresh scones. Her eyebrows raised in question. Helen smiled. For 3, Lena blinked, then smiled back. Layla looked between them, then smiled too. Something shifted. Not loudly, but for the first time in years, Helen felt the branch she nearly cut. Begin to bloom. The contract was signed just after sunrise. Helen sat alone in her study, the morning light catching the gold edges of the stationery as she added her signature to the final page. The room was quiet except for the soft scrape of her pen and the ticking of the mantel clock. The Delacroix Legacy Fund was no longer just a scholarship. It was a full foundation now, endowed, structured, irrevocable. It would outlive her. That was the point. She pressed her thumb gently to the wax seal before passing the folder to Eugene, who waited at the door with a smile that said he'd already read it twice. No edits? He asked. Helen shook her head. None left to make. The open house at the new scholarship center was simple but bright. Whitewashed brick, polished floors, glass doors that opened wide to students and mentors alike. The entrance hall carried the scent of new paint and cut flowers. Tables were lined with brochures and lemonade. Names were pinned to lapels. Lena stood near the front window, chatting with a donor from the university hospital. Layla lingered just behind her, scanning the student board, where each year's cohort would eventually be listed in gold font on navy backing. You think they'll remember this? Layla asked. Lena glanced back. Not yet, but someday they'll say it started here. Helen stood off to the side, watching them both. Two women from different worlds who'd walked the same line of fire and chosen not to burn. Outside the building, across the street, a car idled. Marissa stood beside it in a tan coat, oversized sunglasses shading her face, a coffee cup in one hand, unreadable. She watched the entrance for a long time, never stepped forward, never crossed, just lingered, watching something she couldn't undo. Lena noticed first. Don't say anything, Helen said quietly, without turning. She won't come in. Layla looked toward the window, tense. Do you want me to? No, Helen said. She's already outside, and she stayed there, even as the ribbon was cut, even as the applause carried across the sidewalk. She didn't move, she just faded. 2 weeks later, Helen received a news alert. Tyler Carson lists Westfield home. Amid financial strain, subheader. Once a rising star in local wealth management, Carson's career has stalled after a string of personal and professional scandals. She read it once, then closed the tab. No smugness, no satisfaction. Just air, clean and unscented. That night, Helen opened her old journal, the leather-bound one she'd stopped writing in during the storm. The pages were still half full. She flipped past court dates, audio timestamps, old notes in the margins that once read like survival. On a fresh page, she wrote, "You don't owe anyone your dignity. Keep it with both hands." Then closed the journal and locked it away, not out of fear, but finality. Some stories didn't need revisiting. They'd already been rewritten. The foundation launched its mentorship arm that spring. Each student in the Delacroix program would now be paired with a former nurse or caregiver, a woman or man who'd navigated hardship, service, and silence and still found a way forward. The first case study in the program's archive was titled simply, "The Carson Revision." The bio was short, deliberate. Helen Carson, caregiver, investor, and founder of the Delacroix Legacy Fund. Known for quietly reshaping elder advocacy in Pine Valley through personal litigation and philanthropic restructuring. No photo, just a quote. "When they tried to take everything, I gave more, just not to them." Late that evening, Lena found Helen sitting by the back window, a cup of tea in hand, a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You missed the phone call," Lena said. "The dean wants to schedule a sit-down." Helen nodded. "Tomorrow," Lena hesitated. "You okay?" Helen's gaze drifted out toward the garden. The hydrangeas were blooming again. She nodded. "For the first time in my life, I think I might be." Layla stepped into the room then, holding a folder of schoolwork and a half-eaten granola bar. "Can I ask you something?" Helen smiled. "Always." Layla sat beside her on the window bench. "If they called tomorrow, my parents, and apologized, truly, would you let them in?" Helen was quiet for a long time. Then, "Forgiveness is free, but trust?" She looked Layla in the eyes. "That costs everything they already spent." Layla said nothing. Helen took her hand. Together, they watched the garden bloom. Not the one she'd inherited, but the one she chose to plant. The Delacroix Annual Honors Dinner began at precisely 6 p.m. Inside the sweeping hall of the Pine Valley Arts Pavilion, white-paneled walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers catching every shard of twilight. A string quartet played near the staircase. Velvet-covered chairs filled quickly. Waiters in tuxedos moved like clockwork. Helen arrived at 6:07. She stepped out of the black sedan, arm in arm with Darlene, her heels striking the marble steps in slow, steady rhythm. She wore a tailored charcoal gown, not flashy but cut to perfection, minimal jewelry. Her hair in a soft French twist, revealing the line of her jaw. As they crossed the threshold, heads turned. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. "Is that her? She looks incredible." "I didn't know she was coming," Tyler did. He stood frozen near the champagne bar, drink untouched, eyes trained across the room as Helen entered. For a moment, he said nothing. Couldn't. He looked smaller in person now, softer. A suit 2 seasons out of style, and a face that hadn't known rest in weeks. Marissa wasn't there. Helen's eyes passed over him without pause. She wasn't there for ghosts. At their table, positioned dead center near the front, Eugene, Lena, and Layla stood as Helen arrived. Darlene pulled out her chair. Applause sparked nearby and swelled as she took her seat. "Fashionably late," Eugene murmured, sliding her a place card with a wink. Helen smiled faintly. "Unapologetically late," Lena beamed. Layla leaned in. "You really weren't going to come, were you?" Helen tilted her head. "There was a time I couldn't imagine being in a room like this without flinching." "What changed?" Helen glanced toward the stage. "I stopped waiting for permission." Dinner was served. Roast duck with cherry glaze, lemon risotto, herbed asparagus. Wine poured. Toasts made. The room shimmered in warmth and ambition. Then the host stepped onto the dais. He tapped the mic once. "If I could have your attention for just a moment." The crowd settled. Tonight, we honor someone whose legacy will be felt long after the last course is cleared. Not just through dollars or plaques, but through the people standing because she refused to sit down. A pause. "Ladies and gentlemen, Helen Carson." Chairs shifted. Forks stilled. Helen stood. The applause was immediate. Long, not polite, but real. Sustained. Hands clapped. Someone whistled. Others rose to their feet. A standing ovation, row by row. Tyler stayed seated. Helen crossed to the podium slowly. She didn't look back. Only forward. The microphone hummed softly as she adjusted it. She spoke with no paper. "I wasn't always the kind of person who liked attention," she began. "Still don't, really," soft laughter. "I spent years giving quietly, from behind. I thought that's what strength looked like, invisibility paired with sacrifice." The room fell completely still. But one day, I woke up and realized, the more I gave, the less they saw me. And the less they saw me, the more they took. She paused. "I used to think restoration meant fixing what was broken. Now I know it means building something they can't break again." A murmur of agreement moved through the room. "I didn't come here tonight because I wanted applause. I came because I finally understood I deserved none of the silence I once settled for." She lifted her glass. Just water, no wine. "To the builders, the rebuilders, the ones who stop asking and start becoming." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. As she stepped down from the stage, Lena met her at the bottom of the stairs, eyes shimmering. "Wait here," she whispered. Then she crossed to the side table and picked up something hidden beneath a satin cloth. An engraved crystal presentation plate, thick and clear as ice, held in both hands like something sacred. She handed it to Helen. It read, "Helen Carson, Builder of Legacies, 2025. Helen looked down at it, this object she never asked for, never dreamed would carry her name. And for the first time in her life, she felt no need to downplay it. Layla clapped. Darlene dabbed at her eyes. Eugene lifted his glass. Tyler, across the room, stood now, watching. He looked as if he might speak, but the room was too loud, the story too far gone. Helen met his gaze, once, then turned away. The house smelled like onions, garlic, and smoked paprika. Helen moved through the kitchen with sleeves rolled up and a wooden spoon in hand, stirring the gumbo like she'd done 100 times before. This time, though, she wasn't rushing. There was no urgency, no tension in the air, only jazz from the living room speakers and the low clink of glassware being set. The table was small, just 6 settings. No caterers, no speeches, no guest list, just hers. Lena brought in the pitcher of sweet tea and laid out cloth napkins with practiced ease. Layla followed behind, barefoot, laughing as she dropped an entire spoon into the pot by accident. Darlene fussed over the salad like it was a centerpiece. Eugene arrived last, 2 bottles of red in hand and a pound cake wrapped in foil. When they finally sat down, the gumbo steaming and the cornbread warm enough to melt the butter on contact, Helen looked around and smiled. "I almost skipped this," she said softly, "but then I remembered some tables. You don't wait to be invited to. You build them yourself." They passed around old photos. Ones Helen had pulled from a cedar box in the back closet. Some were grainy, some fading. A few had corners that curled and edges softened by time. There was one of her mother, apron tied too tight, laughing beside a sink full of dishes. Another of Helen in her 20s, holding a sleeping Tyler in a striped blanket. Lena held one up of Helen on her front porch in the 90s, her legs crossed, a paperback in hand. "You've looked like a matriarch since 1993. Helen laughed. "I look like a woman who paid everyone else's phone bill." Darlene passed her a refill. "Same thing, honey." After dessert, Helen excused herself briefly. She returned with 4 envelopes, each one sealed with lavender wax and addressed by hand. Inside, a letter, just 1 page, personalized, private, for no one else's eyes. She handed them out wordlessly, Eugene first, then Darlene, Lena, and finally Layla. No one opened them right away. They didn't have to. Later that night, when the table had been cleared and the lights dimmed low, Helen walked to the study alone. She opened the safe, pulled out the thick folder labeled Trust, Final Copy, Carson Estate, Delacroix Fund. She ran her hand across the top of it once, then closed it and locked it away. Her journal, the old leather-bound one, edges softened like linen, sat waiting near the window. She opened it to the last empty page and wrote in slow, looping script, "Not the maid, the matriarch." She capped the pen, closed the book, and smiled. The porch was cool that night. The wind carried the faint scent of rosemary and sweet smoke from a neighbor's fire pit. Helen stepped outside in her robe and slippers, mug in hand. The stars stretched above her, quiet and indifferent. But she wasn't. She was warm, she was full, she was home. The screen door creaked behind her. Lena appeared, then Layla, flanking her on either side. No one spoke for a while. Finally, Lena looked over. "Think you'll ever write the whole story down?" Helen didn't answer right away. Then she turned to both of them. "I already did." Layla leaned into her side. "What would you call it?" Helen raised her mug. "The toast I raised for myself." And they all laughed, softly, freely, without apology. In the quiet, Helen thought back to that night, the night they shoved her to the sideline. A table she paid for, yet still sat outside of. A moment where they thought cruelty would clip her wings instead of teach her how to fly without permission. She didn't hate them anymore, but she didn't miss them either. And then, as if delivered by memory's own hand, the final line arrived. She whispered it. Not for the room, just for herself. At the fancy restaurant, my son told the waiter, "She's not family, she's our maid." So I raised my glass, because now my lawyer would be announcing a new heir.